This presentation will be a critical review of offender profiling. Offender profiling is a tool used by the FBI and psychologists to identify consistent characteristics within crimes to aim to identify an offender. This strategy is usually applied to serial offences so that comparisons and similarities can be identified. Offender profiling is comprised of a psychological, behavioural and demographical profiles to determine the type of person likely to have committed the offence in question. Within offender profiling, there are two underlying principles in determining if a profile can be obtained. The first principle is that similar offenders may act in similar ways whilst committing an offence. The second principle is the way offenders act within the context of a crime may be similar in other offences that they may have committed, and the way they portray themselves and how they act within their everyday lives. These two principles in offender profiling can help to narrow down potential offenders. There are two different types of analysis that can be utilised when attempting to profile an offender. The first is deductive analysis, which works from more of a general information to then more specific. This approach is also known as the top-down approach. The second is inductive analysis, which aims to generate theories based on specific instances and events, commonly known as the bottom-up approach. There are two types of methods. They include actuarial and clinical. Actuarial method uses collective past behaviours of groups of people who have similar characteristics. Contrastingly, clinical method considers a wide range of behaviour cues specifically focus on the individual that they're trying to work out. There are specific key terms used within offender profiling. They include staging, whereby an offender will leave the crime scene and or the victim in a specific way. Signature, something an offender will do the same during every single one of their offences to either the victim or the scene itself. Trophy consists of something that is taken as a prize from the crime. A souvenir, which is similar to a trophy, although a souvenir has more of a sentimental value to remember the offence from the scene or from the victim. Personation. The term personation refers to when an offender does more than necessary to commit an offence, and they create more of an intimate meaning to the offence. And the MO, the modus operandi, commonly known as just the MO, is the way in which the offender operates and their methods of committing their offences. And the undoing is a term meaning an attempt to undo or rectify the offence that they have just committed. There are limitations within offender profiling, including its reliability and validity, as it is based on the assumption that there is a link between characteristics of offenders and their criminal behaviours. Its usefulness, as it can not be applied to all offences, only usually serial offences. Its accessibility, as there are only a limited number of criminal profilers in the country, I think about 3. And its biased nature, as it is tempting to find the link between behaviours and actions that may have no real correlation to them. Offender profiling has an impact on the way investigative decision-making is acted upon. Data assimilation, the way in which potential suspects are identified and how they are narrowed down from the police reports. And the crime classification, offender profilers decide whether the crime scene in question is organised or a disorganised one. An attempt to reconstruct the crime sequence, the behaviours and motives, and the offender and the behaviours a response from the victim. They try and recreate it to try and work out what they might have been thinking or where they might go next. From this, the generation of a profile is developed, which may decide the decisions on what to do next, and potential likely offenders who fit the profile that has been created. There have been many case studies where offender profiling has been effectively utilised. one of them being the case of the railway rapist, who is now identified as John Duffy. The rapes and murders took place around the Hampstead area. Duffy knew the railway very well as he worked British Rail. The characteristics identified based on interpersonal consistency. These include he was a male, mid to late 20s, poor relationship with women, considerable sexual experience, only a couple of male friends, experience with police or a knowledge of forensic procedures, as after he committed a rape or a murder, if he raped them, he would often comb the pubic hair of the women to remove his own sort of DNA of his own pubic hair. Probably not very physically strong, as you can see he's quite like a small man, and have been previously sort of in trouble with the police or some kind of affiliation with the police. Characteristics were also based on spatial consistency, knowledge of the railway stations, as this was connected to his employment, and he worked and lived by the railway and the scenes where he committed the crimes. These characteristics of the offender profile meant that John Duffy moved up the list of suspects to the prime suspect, and this was due to his very specific similarities to the offender profile that was created. As John Duffy was 29 at the time of the offences, he worked as a carpenter for British Rail. He was previously married, but at the time of the offences he was separated. During the marriage to his previous wife, he engaged in violent sexual acts and abuse towards the wife at the time. He had a criminal record, and he also only had two male friends, one of which who was David Malachi, who also raped and murdered in the same context, and was kind of his partner in crime. This case study of the railway rapist and the criminal profile which was developed shows it can be a strong, reliable tool to identify serial offenders. It shows a strong evidence base for the impact offender profiling has within investigative decision making, and how, if developed correctly, it can lead to the identification of the offender. And there were references. The reflective questions. And the most enjoyable part of developing this presentation was probably the topic. I've always been interested in offender profiling, so to do a presentation on it was just enjoyable. It didn't really feel like work. The most challenging part about this presentation is probably the actual presentation and the filming of it. Even though no one's here, it's just a bit uncomfortable talking to yourself and presenting. What skills I would take forward from this experience to my future learning? Yeah, just confidence in talking to myself and just being able to present, because every time you do it, it just gets a bit easier every time, I guess. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.